Let me share my screen. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me. My name is Andrea Bond. I am a certified health and life coach, as well as a wellness educator with the Juice Plus company. And I am the one who put together these lunch and learns for the next several weeks. This is our second in a series. Thank you for joining me over the lunchtime today. These will be continuing through the 30th of September with a different topic every month, with the goal always to be in the 20 to 30-minute max range. So you have other time to get other things accomplished, of course. Always want to be respectful of your time. And so, again, I appreciate you being here today, and hopefully you will join me for a future session. So, a little bit more about myself and why I chose to set these lunch and learns up and why I'm so passionate about sharing about good health. I am a mom of three and a grandmother of one now. And, it wasn't until probably I started my family, if I'm being honest, that I really started to pay attention to health in my family. And I say that because my grandmother had Parkinson's many, many years back. We've had many of the common illnesses and diseases in our family, but Parkinson's seemed to be prevalent. And I didn't think much of it when grandma had it, but when my mom was diagnosed at 40, and then I began to have a family, I began to question, like, what is going on here? Why did grandma suffer with a disease that now my mother has had and has definitely been battling for over 35 years now? And, what does this mean for my future? And so I remember going to my mom's neurologist many years back and asking, what's going on here? And his answer was, it's genetics and you're likely next. And if you want to do something, we can do a genetic test. And that was it. And honestly, that was so frightening to me that I just became obsessed, if you will, in a good way, with the idea of health and wellness. And really, I have to credit the Juice Plus company for opening my eyes to a whole different way of living and fueling my educational journey. If one of the things I love about the company so much is that their mission is to inspire healthy living around the world. And so I guess this is my way of living out that mission by wanting to help people live healthier lives and share some of the information that I've accumulated over the many, many years of digging in and my readings and listening to doctor lectures and everything else that I've had the opportunity to learn. And so I chose today's topic of inflammation very intentionally because I believe this is something that is so overlooked in our society, and yet perhaps one of the biggest dangers to our health overall. And so the first thing I want to address is that not all inflammation is bad. There are actually two types of inflammation when we think about it. And what, honestly, we're probably much more familiar with acute than chronic. So let's break those down for just a moment. Acute inflammation is just that natural healing process. So you can think of, a fever would be an example of your body's response to maybe a virus or an infection. Redness, swelling, pain, those, say when you injure yourself, you cut yourself, that's your body's response. That's acute inflammation or the immune system going to work to heal your body. And so this is a good type of inflammation because it does have healing properties, but it should always be short term, meaning that maybe a few days to a few weeks, depending on the severity of the injury that you might be dealing with. On the other side of this is chronic inflammation, and this is far more dangerous because it's kind of long lasting and lingering. And when it does so, it damages our tissues and organs over time. And so, as you can see on this image of examples of chronic inflammation, it can impact so many different organs, if you will, or systems within our bodies and lead to a multitude of illnesses if we leave it unchecked. So, the first thing we probably want to know is, well, how do I know if I might have any of this chronic inflammation happening? So, some common symptoms you might be experiencing, or maybe have somebody in your life experiencing that has you interested in this topic. Body's pain, first of all. I think when we think of inflammation, too, probably the most common illness, if you will, is arthritis. So it can be more severe, like a rheumatoid arthritis, but just general. I know my mom is dealing with a lot of arthritis and inflammation in her body right now, and we're doing what we can to get it under control. But that's just one symptom, right? Kind of that pain or the aches that we're feeling. But there's other things like fatigue and insomnia, certainly mood disorders like depression or anxiety. Weight gain is definitely a sign of inflammation in your bodies, right? Something might be off, as well as any gastrointestinal issues and infections. And so when it comes to kind of wondering, is this something going on in my body? I really feel like we're all, for the most part, pretty attuned to what's going on and know when something feels out of sorts. So, my best advice to you in that case would be to not ignore it, but to address it, to get to a doctor, and to ask for blood work specifically, because they can measure inflammatory markers within the blood to help determine if your body's exposed or your internal organs are exposed to some chronic inflammation. Okay, so let's take a little bit deeper dive into the idea of chronic inflammation in our body. This is so concerning. I've heard the best analogy being that the insides of our bodies are on fire. So I have an analogy. I always love visuals. Helps me really process, kind of that deeper information. And so let's just use your house as an example. Maybe you're cooking dinner and a small kitchen fire starts, right? It's small. It doesn't seem to be spreading too quickly. And so it doesn't seem like a major threat at the time that it starts. But how do you respond? You absolutely go into action and you go to put out that fire. And why is that? It's because you know that if you don't, right, get that under control, eventually the whole house could burn down. And the same thing is happening with inflammation in our bodies. So it is that slow, simmering fire that is just going to continue to spread, and it's impacting all of our major organs, from our brain to our heart to our lung, gut, and joints. And so, again, it's that pain, right? So, pain is a really good symptom of it, why we want to pay attention and not dismiss any pain we might be feeling. But interestingly, when it comes to like our heart, I think it's so intriguing that we pay so much attention in blood work to things like cholesterol levels and worrying about that impact on heart disease, when things like inflammation far more impact and cause more cardiovascular disease than anything like cholesterol. And so ultimately, inflammation is the primary cause of unhealthy aging, and the cause of that inflammation is most likely a poor diet. There's, of course, could be some underlying things going on, but the majority of cases, it's going to be diet related. And that goes back to the foods we eating. And so it's so important to know that processed foods, I'm a huge proponent of a whole food diet. Processed foods contain pro-inflammatory ingredients. So the way I think of that is kind of like the chemicals, right? Synthetic ingredients in processed foods are kind of like throwing a little bit of gasoline on that internal fire every time we eat them. And so if we do things to control that inflammation, we ultimately can age healthier. So, I want to introduce you to a term that might sound a little strange, inflammaging. But if you break it down, I'm guessing that you can figure out what it means. It's ultimately the idea that this constant inflammation is accelerating aging in our bodies. And so it's thus why it's so important to not ignore symptoms or leave it undetected. This is ultimately determining the quality and longevity of our lives. And so I think these pictures, I chose these on this slide for a very specific purpose. It's bottom line how well we age. And when I consider inflammaging and how it, as we just touched on chronic inflammation a few moments ago, and how it impacts different systems and organs in the body, I look at this on a very personal level, and I look at how on the brain, if you can see that diagram on the left, it can contribute to Parkinson's disease. And so this is just one of the many ways that I can make positive choices in my diet and lifestyle approach to diminish or decrease the likelihood of that Parkinson's diagnosis. When I go back to that neurologist comment all those years ago, it's so interesting to me because genetics is only a small portion of the equation. Diet and lifestyle is 70% of the equation. And so, what that means, there's a whole term and study you can go into called epigenetics. But bottom line, it means that we can be empowered and in far more control of these genetic tendencies. And so, one of the culprits to this chronic inflammation that happens is something called oxidative stress. You may or may not be familiar with that term, but it's basically rusting of our bodies. So think of an apple turning brown as you expose it to air, it's oxidizing. Think of a car. Let's say you live in San Diego, perfect climate all the time, right? No major issues. Um, Maybe a little bit too close to the water. I don't know. But you've got a car and it's going to rust over time, but it will rust more slowly because it's not being impacted by, maybe if you live in the Midwest and you're facing, I lived in Nebraska for over 40 years. And so we would face the ice and the snow and the salt that was thrown on the roads would cause our cars to age faster. So this chronic inflammation is just expediting the aging of our bodies if we don't get it under control. And so the good news is oxidative stress, which we'll touch on again in just a few moments, but it's something that we can control with diet and lifestyle. And so again, it's absolutely unrealistic to think we're not going to age over time. We're all growing older every single day. Good news or bad news, but the good news is we can control that through natural ways and not just have to lean toward prescriptions or things like that or inflammation shots. I know when I was just visiting home recently, my mom, who I'll be very candid, I really struggle with helping her choose a better diet, if you will. And so, what was one of the things I had to do? I had to go and take her to the doctor to get a shot in a hip to help control the inflammation she was feeling in a hip. That can offer short term relief, but it's not going to fix the inflammation unless we look at more natural alternatives that also don't come with a side effect. Okay. So, let's talk about the three top ways you can fight chronic inflammation naturally. Because again, it's not about a shot or necessarily a pill that can put a band-aid on things. They can certainly help in a temporary situation, but as soon as you might stop that prescription or that shot wears off, you kind of end up in this vicious cycle. And so my hope is to inspire people with natural ways that they can feel empowered again to really take control. So here are the top three when it comes to chronic inflammation. The first being movement, exercise. I always hesitate to use that E word of exercise because I feel like some people make that a negative. It's actually one of the foundations in my daily habit. Like I literally enjoy exercising every day, not because I sweat and it's hard, but because I know it's doing good things for my body. And so the reason movement is so important is when we move our bodies, we're enhancing the blood flow, which is allowing our immune cells to circulate more effectively. So it's basically just like pushing all those immune cells out at an even better rate that allows them to respond to that inflammation more efficiently. They're kind of right there on top of it as things begin to pop up. So moving your body is so important. Stress, reducing stress. I have a daughter. I'm gonna just call her out here. She's not watching today. She might not appreciate this, but she operates in a constant state of stress. And this is so damaging. And the irony is she has so many good healthy habits in her life, but I always talk to her about it's great that you're exercising. It's great that you eat a healthy diet, but you can't ignore the stress that you're putting your body under. And the reason is that when we're in a state of stress, the body is releasing stress hormones. You might recognize like the terms cortisol, right? Adrenaline, those kinds of things. That's that fight or flight response. So our body is trying to protect us. But the longer we operate in that kind of survival mode, the more damage that's going to occur in our bodies. So we don't want to take stress lightly. We want to do things, whether it's meditation, whether it's deep breathing techniques, whether it's, being more intentional about our sleep. We definitely need to give more importance to rest and de-stressing, if you will. And then the third component, and I think the most impactful to fighting chronic inflammation, that hopefully is, I'm going to equip you here in a few moments, is in our food choices. Because going back to that concept of oxidative stress, right, the rusting of our bodies, there is something called antioxidants in a whole food diet that combat that oxidative stress. So it's like, which one's going to win out? We can actually reduce and oftentimes eliminate some of the oxidative stress that our body might be facing, those aging, the impacts of aging, if you will, when we are focused on antioxidants and polyphenols in particular in our diet. Okay, so you've probably heard the term anti-inflammatory diet. It's basically a diet rich in antioxidants and polyphenols. So, antioxidants, again, are just going to slow down the rusting. I'm going to keep it super, super simple. There's all this about, electrons and neurons and all the science behind it that you can research. But the bottom line is that we've got these free radicals circulating from that oxidative stress, and that the antioxidants are going to neutralize them. And when we neutralize them by getting a diet full of antioxidant loaded foods, we're going to be able to reduce that inflammatory process or that chronic inflammation happening in our bodies. And then polyphenols might be a term that's a little bit less familiar for us, but it's just a group of phytochemicals or plant-based chemicals that some foods contain. So again, I like the idea of just these are superfoods. So these aren't only antioxidant rich foods, these are foods that are like extra loaded with antioxidants, and they're most observable by the color, right? They have really vibrant colors. So you've probably heard about eating the rainbow. That's so, so important. So let me give you an example of like if you're having a salad one day and you've got the option of a spinach salad or maybe a wedge salad. Wedge salads are typically made with iceberg lettuce. Think about the colors of the iceberg and think about the color of that spinach salad. Which one is going to have more antioxidants and polyphenols? It's going to be the spinach salad. So we want to load our diet with as many plants as possible. And that's why I have to tell you about the protective benefits of Juice Plus, because this truly has become the catalyst that has changed everything in our bodies. And so if you think about those pictures of antioxidants and polyphenols, look at these 30 different fruits, vegetables, and berries. What do you see? Bottom line, that's what you see. A massive amount of antioxidants and especially polyphenols. They're really prominent in berries, for instance. Okay. And so, what the Juice Plus company has done that I feel is so genius is taken all these plants here, these specific 30 fruits, vegetables, and berries that I'm showing you, and they've grown them working with the farmers to peak nutrient content. Then they picked them and ground them up and dehydrated them. And so what you see here are three different options to load your body with antioxidants and polyphenols. There's capsule version. There's the superfoods, which ironically I'm drinking right now. I love my superfoods. It's like part of my lunch every day. And then there's chewables if you like to snack on it. And so when it comes to the nutritional space or nutritional support, supplements, whatever you want to call it, I'm just going to call it like it is. There is a multitude of things out there, and it is a very confusing space, and it's a space where you need to be extremely skeptical of what you are presented with. I am not asking you to sit here and just think, because you and listen to this Lunch and Learn today, and I talked about the value of Juice Plus, you should get Juice Plus. I am telling you that there are things out there that are full of hype with no proof. And sadly, for many years after I had that neurologist conversation, I was consuming them. I was taking a multivitamin. I was giving my kids Flintstones vitamins because I grew up on them and thought that's what you did. I was taking glucosamine. I was taking calcium. I was doing all these things, and yet, when I look back as a runner, I've always been a runner my adult life, I was facing chronic injuries from my exercise, and our family was constantly plagued with illness. Like we were in the pediatrician's office and on antibiotics far more than I ever wish would have happened. In fact, I have to say, knowing what I know now, my grandson is now 15 months old, and we load his body with these protective powders every day, and he has done nothing but wellness visits for in his short life so far. But when you think about little babies and how chronic ear infections and sicknesses are, my kids experienced them all when they were little. When we know better, we can do better. And so, two things I want you to know about Juice Plus quickly, and you can do your own research beyond that. You can reach out to the person who invited you to this Lunch and Learn for more details. But it has a program that is so powerful called Healthy Starts for Family that allows any adult that gets started with any of these options you see here to sponsor a child for free. That is truly inspiring healthy living and changing children's health, which is our topic next week. But more importantly, it is researched. It is so heavily researched. And what I love more importantly than all of it is the value it offers your body. Because when you look at the pricing of Juice Plus on a monthly basis, it breaks down to on average $3 or so a day. If you were to go to the grocery store, which I hope you do, I hope you load your body with antioxidants and polyphenols to avoid this chronic inflammation and the dangers of it. But if you were to buy simply two or three things in that picture, you would be spending probably $5 a day. So that to me is the best part of it. But again, I don't put anything in my body anymore, knowing what I know, unless it's proven to protect through research. And so I just pulled real quickly two of the studies that have been done on Juice Plus, all independent research, but on inflammation specifically. And this is, again, information. We can send you links to this if you're interested, but I just want to sum it up here on the first one, tiny writing. But it says chronic inflammation contributes to an increased risk for developing chronic conditions such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancer. A high inflammatory load is defined as elevated inflammation markers. We already talked about that you can check it in blood work, right? But this bottom line showed that the fruit, vegetable, and berry blends of Juice Plus impacted those inflammatory markers in a positive way. The other study shows that when consumed, the inflammatory markers reduced in the body by between 16 and 35%. And so I share this with you today to empower you again. I love that word. I think that is the most important thing. We are far too often victims or feel like victims of genetic condition, illness, and disease. I always say that while illness and disease are very, very common, they are not normal. We are not meant to spend our life in doctors' offices, ultimately wheelchair bound or worse, God forbid. We can take control. And yes, there is, remember I said 30% genetics. There is some things beyond our control, But the important thing to understand is more is in our control. So, first and foremost, at the very least, I would encourage you, if you are not already taking Juice Plus, give it a try. I can tell you after sharing this wellness message, if you will, for almost 20 years, I can't even share how many customers have come back to me saying pre Juice Plus blood work and post Juice Plus blood work and all the improvements to it. I just feel it's such an easy foundational things to do. And you have multitude of options when getting started. Of course, you can literally just scan a QR code or again go to the person who invited you and just get a link and be a customer and you'll be invited and into all that information and educational resources in addition to flooding your body with all those antioxidants and polyphenols. But you can also choose to offset the cost of your product by paying an additional $52 to become what we call like an affiliate or take advantage of the wholesale program where you can offset. I did that initially. I saw the value, but knew my mom needed it, knew my dad faced chronic sinus infections, just wanted to help a couple people in my family. So I chose that route. But ultimately, as you can see today, I became so empowered by the good we can do. And this is just that snowball effect of putting one good thing in our body that leads to more and more positive changes. And so you can certainly get excited about it like I did and choose to even bless others with the message and invite them to future Lunch and Learns. So if you're curious, next week I mentioned we're going to be focusing a little bit more on children's health. It is truly sad these days what kids are facing that they did not face years ago. So our topic will be back to school, not back to sick, and we're going to have a special guest speaker on next week's Lunch and Learn. So most importantly, I hope you got some value out of today's message. I hope you find some proactive, natural ways to combat and prevent that inflammation in your body. And I hope to see you again soon on another Lunch and Learn. Thank you for joining me today and have a wonderful afternoon.